Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, serving clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. And today's episode is going to be about Love Hotel, Summer House a little, because I feel like the Jesse and Lexi thing is just getting really old and stale, and I can't wait to no longer talk about it anymore. And of course, The Valley, because The Valley I spent so much time on. I feel that there were so many different, equally important things going on with different people. And so I'm going to talk a lot about that today. And the other thing I want to make sure I tell everybody is that I am going to cover Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. So I did cover it last year, season 1. I did cover that. I don't remember what episodes, but if you look back, they are there. Didn't realize it came out. And then someone, like, as soon as it came out, people were like, are you going to cover it? And I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know it came out. Because I've been doing a really good job at being good to myself, like doing things on my own time, listening to my body, still recovering from some things that happened over the last month or so. And so I've been crushing it on self-care, but that also means that I am behind in podcasting. And if I'm being honest, for all my chronic illness folks listening, I just feel like I'm always spinning a lot of plates and I'm not doing it really successfully. But sometimes feelings aren't facts. And so, I am doing the best I can, and I appreciate everybody's patience. As I said last week, I am definitely going to be taking a break soon because it's just time. I need that. But I'm just going to have to figure out what that timeline is going to look like, because I am going to cover Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. And so if I'm on my break, I will post those episodes to Patreon or YouTube subscription. And then when I come back, I will post them all publicly. But either way, don't worry. I will talk about it. I will release all the episodes for free. I'm just not sure how that's all going to shake out in whatever way works best for me. This is new to me. This whole radical self-care thing is really new. So I'm still trying to navigate it and trying not to feel bad about, everything I'm missing or everything I'm not doing. Because the fact is, when you have a lot of health issues, you can't do it all. Oh, and one thing I will say before I get into all this is that this week I met with a movement disorder specialist who confirmed my diagnosis of dystonia. And he has me on this trial of L-DOPA, which is usually what people with Parkinson's disease take. So apparently with dystonia, there's 10% of the population that responds to L-DOPA the way that Parkinson's patients will. And so I'm trying that medication and it's kind of creating some havoc. I also don't think it's helping, which was a blessing and a curse because honestly, I didn't like the way the medication made me feel. Very drowsy. It creates GI issues, and I already have a whole host of those. So I've just kind of felt like a guinea pig this week. And when you have, a big medication like that on top of other medications, my cancer meds, just a ton of things, it's just not made me feel really good. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that. And so I've just really been listening to myself, and it's uncomfortable. I will say that, because when you're doing anything new or different that's good for you, it's probably going to be uncomfortable. So, it's been a little bit uncomfortable for me, but, I share it with you because I know that it helps, and sending love out there to anyone dealing with a lot of chronic illness stuff, dystonia, cancer, whatever it is, you're just amazing and keep crushing it. And, or the best that you can do, which some days, for me, crushing it is just being cool, tolerating my feelings. You know what I mean? Just tolerating the emotions that come with this roller coaster of a life sometimes. And that is crushing it. I just think all humans, we're doing a lot better than we think we're doing or we give ourselves credit for. So just a lovely reminder of that, because I think you're all just doing the best you can. And my goodness, that's enough. So let's get into Bravo. I'm going to start with Love Hotel because I am fascinated by Shannon Storm Spador. Now, here's the irony, is that last week I covered Love Hotel, and so Love Hotel airs on Sundays, okay? I record my podcast on Mondays to release for Tuesdays. And there's a reason why I'm sharing this with you all, which is um, Sundays, if I'm having a fun weekend or if I'm really exhausted from a fun weekend, Love Hotel and Real Housewives of Atlanta airs. And so I just have not had time to watch those because I'm prioritizing my self-care. But last week I covered Love Hotel and this new episode was out that I didn't get to talk about. So I'm going to talk about that today. Now there is another new episode out that of course I didn't catch, but not the most recent episode, the one before that, I was talking about Shannon and Earl, and the next episode that I watched, it all became like super clear to me. And I thought it was super clear to me before when I talked about it, which there were parts of it that it was, but I have a lot to say about Shannon and Earl. I kept the recording of it, on my DVR because I wanted to watch it again. I wanted to specifically write down what Shannon said, what Earl said, because essentially what happened is they get into this argument. And it was so fascinating for me to watch because it seemingly came out of nowhere. My theory is that Shannon is feeling, okay, so two things. The episode that I'm talking about, it was Shannon's 1-year anniversary of her DUI, right? And so I definitely understand that anniversary could create triggers. And so this is something that I'm going to talk about throughout the podcast today. But I think in addition to the word narcissist and gaslighting, trigger is a really overused word. And so I want to be really clear that a trigger is something that activates a memory or association of a past trauma or a distressing event. So it's a complex physiological event. Being triggered does not simply mean being upset, and it is not an excuse for acting out behaviors. So I just want to be really clear about that because this is especially important when it comes to the Valley. Jessie Lally keeps talking about being triggered, and I'm like, you're just being an asshole. You're not triggered. So I just want to be clear about that term. So I think, Shannon talked about being triggered, Earl talked about being triggered, and I think that is an appropriate use of the term in that Shannon had this very, very hard event in terms of the DUI. A lot of consequences came from that from her. I think mostly in terms of, the Bravo world talking about it and, having to come to terms with her relationship with John Jansen. And, I thought that she was maybe taking some stock of how she played a role in some of these relationships with men. But I feel like this episode of Love Hotel, by the way, was I calling it Love Island? If I was just calling it Love Island, I'm so sorry. It's Love Hotel. It's a real rough Monday morning for you, girl. But on Love Hotel, I feel like I get this picture of how these things happen for Shannon, which is that she says, she has a bad picker, right? She's like, I have a bad picker. I tend to choose narcissists, again, which is an extremely overused term. What does that mean? You choose people who have narcissistic traits and tendencies, who have narcissistic personality disorder. Are they selfish? Do they lack empathy? Do they not ask you about your day? What are we talking here? And I think for me, one of the most frustrating things about kind of overuse of therapy terms is it dilutes the actual meaning of what people are saying. So before people would overuse the term narcissist, they would just say what they meant. And so sometimes I want to know, what do you mean when you say someone's a narcissist? Also, I feel like people say it and they don't really know what it means. And so that also irritates me because that's a big word. That's a big accusation. It's a heavy word. As I've explained before, we all have narcissistic traits and tendencies, and I tend to look at things from my clinical perspective on a continuum. So if you're on this first half of the continuum, we all have narcissistic traits and tendencies, myself included, okay? But then when you go to the second half of the continuum, and especially on that higher end, that's where you're going to have the narcissistic personality disorder, some antisocial personality disorder, those tendencies, those traits that walk into disorder. And how you know something is a disorder is asking yourself, how is this impacting my life? Am I having trouble in my personal relationships? In my relationships, outside of my home? Am I having problems at work? Am I having problems with, it's like with my children or, whatever. So it's like, I tend to look at disorder in terms of how is it impacting people's lives? Because the fact of it is that if it's not impacting your life a whole lot, then it's probably traits and tendencies. But where it starts to impact other people, especially with narcissism, is when it's on the higher end of this continuum, where those people on this higher end, they don't realize that they're the problem, because the problem with narcissists inherently is that they don't see their role. They are everybody else is the problem and it's definitely not them. And so I just wanted to explain that really quickly, because I think that one of the most, frustrating things that I'm seeing on some of these shows, and why I'm glad that I'm here, is there's these use of these terms. And I just want to make sure that everyone is super clear about, no, not everyone is a narcissist. Not everyone is a gaslighter. Not everyone is, sometimes people are just assholes. I feel like David Bedour and John Jansen were both, pretty terrible, to be honest. And how do I know that? Is that if you're the issue, you're going to keep recreating stuff in every relationship that you're in. Right. And so David Bedour, he was like in love with his wife, Leslie. And then they had I think they had some issues where there was accusations of domestic violence, and then they ended up getting divorced. And so that does tell me that Shannon was probably correct, that David leans a little bit higher on that, the continuum that I talked about. John Jansen, I imagine, as well. Gosh, I was just thinking this morning of how grateful I am that Alexis is gone and John is gone, and that Alexis could have had such a triumphant return, but she chose to just do the same shit that she's done for her entire life, which is be a mouthpiece for a terrible man. And so my point is that I believe that Shannon probably does have a bad picker, but I also believe that she is a huge part of the problem, and the call is coming from inside the house. And I will tell you why. So there was this scene where they were all having a group dinner, and they were talking about food, and Shannon gave him the menu, and Earl said that he didn't eat vegetables. And Shannon literally looked at him like he was insane. She looked disgusted. And I think this is the thing that Shannon maybe isn't aware of, is that Shannon's face is very loud. And I say that jokingly because so is mine, right? And that's not necessarily sometimes people wear their emotions on their face. I am one of those people. And I've gotten in trouble for it my entire life, which is not necessarily fair, because when you have a big emotion and it shows on your face, I'm allowed to feel those feelings. And if someone else feels threatened by that, well, then that's up to them. But at the same time, it can be a lot for people. So I kind of saw this with Shannon, where she looked at Earl so disgusted, it was such a strong look. I was like, ooh, that's an intense look. And Earl was like, why do you always look like you want to slap me? And I was like, oh my gosh. And I thought at first that that's what triggered Shannon, because we know that there were some alleged allegations. I know nothing about that. She was maybe slapped John, or something physical happened there. That was what John and Alexis claimed. That's alleged. I have no idea if that's true or not, but I thought that's what triggered her. And so she explained, she's like, well, you have to eat She just turned into such she was so critical about it, almost talking to him like he was a child. And listen, I understand, in Orange County, she explained this too. In Orange County, in California, people eat a lot of vegetables. I'm plant-based. Vegetables are literally my life. Eat leafy greens, every vegetable you can imagine. The only vegetable I don't like is mushrooms, and I just don't like the texture. I just can't. Also squash. I don't like the texture of squash. But pretty much everything else, I am a huge vegetable person. But not everybody is, right? And so I understood why she was shocked, but I just felt like she took it to a level that it didn't need to go to. And Earl felt that too. And he said something like, you're being awfully critical, or why are you being so critical? I forget the exact term that he said, the exact wording. And she kind of just shut it down and they moved on. But then something else happened, and it led them to have this discussion where they're both sharing how, like, Earl is sharing that he feels criticized by Shannon, and that's a trigger for him because his ex-wife was very critical. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. And his response to her criticism also seemed appropriate. But Shannon didn't think so. And so this is where Shannon, I believe, becomes her own problem. Her and Earl are talking and he's explaining, this is why I was triggered. And it seems like she understands it. And she's like, okay, so this is why I was triggered. I think she said something about, just like, I don't know, a history of bad relationships. And she felt like attacked. But here's the problem with Shannon. She feels attacked by everything. And so the thing is, like, with Shannon, you just can't give her real feedback because she takes it as an attack. And that's a Shannon problem, quite frankly. And so her and Earl, they talked, and I thought they were in a place of understanding. Like, literally, they were resolving this. And then Shannon, literally before my eyes, reignites it by just being like, well, I don't understand. I don't. And, I'm kind of like riffing off of, like, Amy does a really good impression of Shannon Bedore that Shannon also has said to Amy, like, she loves Amy Phillips's impression. But she just dove back in because she could not be wrong. And I was like, okay. And so here's how I know that this is a Shannon problem. Shannon is at Love Hotel, and she is recreating her relationship issues with someone that she barely knows. So that's how I know it's a Shannon problem. And dare I say, I think Shannon may be a bit of a queen baby, if I'm being honest. So I talk about king babies a lot. Queen baby is the counterpart to king baby, and it is where people who have a history of overutilizing alcohol, because I don't know what Shannon, I think it's clear that she was overutilizing alcohol when it came to her DUI. I have no idea where she's at now. I have no idea what she identifies as an alcoholic or not. That is not my place to judge. But what I can say is, obviously with her DUI, it was the anniversary of that, and I think that she felt like she should be given a lot of grace because she was having big feelings. But the fact is that the world doesn't stop turning on its axis because we have big feelings. I have big feelings a lot. I get triggered frequently. It is my responsibility to manage that and manage my own big feelings. But I think Shannon felt like, how dare you, call me critical or bring these things up when it's the 1-year anniversary and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that is queen baby behavior to a T. So queen baby, is kind of like king baby, where people really have a sense of entitlement of like, this isn't fair. Life isn't fair. Things need to be my way. Everybody needs to do what I want them to do. And that is just not life. And so it really just became super apparent to me that Shannon is kind of a professional victim. And if she is recreating these issues with men from Love Hotel that she doesn't even really know, that's a sign that she's really got to work on her stuff. But then it got so much worse. And what I was frustrated about is that, Giselle was like, there's no crying in the Love Hotel. Giselle, Luann, and Ashley were like, what is happening? And also Countess Luann, when feelings are involved, she is just like, I'm just trying to like get some D, and I have no interest in Shannon's meltdown. So like Giselle was like, there's no crying in Love Hotel. Countess Luann was just like, bye. She was like off in a bush somewhere. I'm just kidding. But that was one of my favorite Countess Luann moments. She got drunk and fell in a bush, and it was just like hilarious. I mean, not hilarious because I think she had, says now that she is an alcoholic and she's, I'm not sure what she's doing with sobriety. That's not my place to talk about. But anyway, so Ashley, though, is really sweet and kind and caring and empathic. And I think that Shannon looks for people like Ashley who don't necessarily identify the problematic parts of what Shannon's doing and then like set boundaries appropriately. So, okay, here's what happened. Shannon basically calls Earl a prick or something. And I'm like, he was just telling you how he felt and he was doing it appropriately and it all made sense. Like, you're the one that's kind of being a dick, Shannon. So she walks away. She's just like, wow, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And then she goes back to her room and she cries. And then the ladies, maybe minus Countess Luann, because I just think she is just on her mission, which God bless. By the way, I say God bless all the time, but I say it like I'm not a religious person. I just kind of say it like mazel, like good for you, just to be really clear about that. So they go to her room and Shannon hears them knocking and there's like a camera in her room and she's just like pacing. And so they knock and they're like, please, Shannon, can you answer the door? And she doesn't. And I thought, that's interesting. But then what she does do is when everyone leaves, Ashley and Wally, or Wale, I think it is, not Wally, Wale, they're out talking and having their time. And Shannon comes out like such a cock blocker and just sits down next to them. It's nighttime. There's no one else outside. Everyone is in their rooms doing whatever. And Shannon is just looking for some attention and some love. And so here's the thing. We all need attention and we all need support. But what irritated me about this is that Shannon had the opportunity for that and she chose not to open the door. What she chose to do is to be dramatic, to leave the door closed, and then to insert herself into something that wasn't her business with Ashley and Wale. And I didn't like that at all. To me, that felt very queen baby. That felt very victim. That felt very attention seeking. And the fact is, we all need attention. We all need love, support, and attention. We all do things to seek out support from other people. All of us, myself included. But what Shannon did, to me, it crossed a boundary and I didn't like it at all. And Ashley is nice enough that she said, you know, Wale, I'm on a show to try to find love and I really think you're great, but I'm going to send you back to your room because my girl Shannon needs some support. If I were Ashley, I would not have done that because I think Shannon needed a boundary at that point. Ashley tried to come to your room. She tried to talk to you. You chose to willfully ignore her. And now you want the attention now that she's with somebody else. I just don't support that. And the other thing is, like, if you needed some support from somebody, go to Giselle, go to Countess Luann, go to someone who's not actively, like, doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so, you know, Ashley talks to her and she cries. Oh my gosh, wait, before I say this too, Ashley, Giselle, and Countess Luann, there was another moment before Shannon even went to her room that she was crying and she was processing. And so what I'm saying is that Shannon had plentiful opportunities to process this and talk, but it's like she wanted to do it on her terms and she was so emotionally dysregulated, she just could not let it go. She couldn't let it go. It was just like obsess, 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 obsess. And I was like over this tiny little thing. It was just so wild. So clearly it really wasn't about Earl. I think with Shannon, it was about a lot of big feelings about the 1-year anniversary of her DUI. And thinking about like, I don't know that this is where she thought she would be in her life at this age. I don't think Shannon thought she would be at Love Hotel. I don't think Shannon thought she would be single. I don't think Shannon thought she would be, 1 year out from a DUI. And the other thing I think Shannon's really unhappy about that she is unable to name is that, what I talked about last time, the same thing happened this week, which is all the women are having all these men fall all over them. And Shannon really only has Earl. There aren't a lot of other men who are interested in Shannon. And I think that, I think she feels really upset about that. So I think one thing that Shannon does that I can recognize is sometimes when we have big feelings about things that we don't deem appropriate or we don't want to be upset about, we'll blame it on something else that it's like appropriate to be upset about. And I think that's exactly what Shannon is doing here. And the reason why she can't settle herself emotionally is because she's not getting to the root of that emotion. I think she's trying to make it about Earl and she's trying to make it about the DUI, but I think it's this greater grief process of like her kids are gone and she is single and I think she's lonely and I think she has a lot of grief about where her life is. And because she's not talking about that, it's coming out sideways. Because that's one thing we talk about in the program is like, if you stuff 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag, things are going to come out sideways. And I think that's what's going on for Shannon. And so, Ashley takes a moment to be a good friend and talk to Shannon and, then that's it. But the other thing is that the same thing happened that I talked about last week, which is where the women got to choose another man or men to stay. And so Shannon gives her key to, and I'm going to be honest, these new guys, I cannot remember their names. She gives this key to this one guy who she connected with, right? But then the guy who she chose ends up connecting with Countess Luann. And Countess Luann is really into this guy, like really into him. I think his name is Mark. But anyway, so then Countess Luann chose this other guy. And literally, she's talking to Giselle, Countess Luann is about, I like Mark, so I'm going to give Shannon this other guy. And I think that's part of the other grief process here is that Shannon feels like a fish out of water. Giselle, Ashley, and Countess Luann are thriving at Love Hotel. Like they should be permanent residents. Like it's just, it suits them. And Shannon just sticks out like a sore thumb and she feels that. And so I think that's the real underneath of what's not being said, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong, but that's what I see. And so, because it never feels good to feel like left out or less than, or, like there's all these men here and I don't, feel like I have a connection with people. My only connection is with this guy, Earl, who doesn't even eat vegetables. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I think there's really more of why she's upset. So that's kind of my take on that. And, I feel like I told the story of this, like my oldest niece, when she was little, she used to tell these stories that were like 25 minutes. And I was like, where are we going with this? And by the way, she's 18 years old. She still tells stories like that. And I just love every minute. I will be silent for every bit of 25 minutes, listening for every detail of this story because I just think she's so sweet. I love her so much. And I feel like that's how I just told the story. But listen, my brain is, she's struggling today and this is the best I got. So hopefully you all understood what I meant by that. I think I understood what I meant by that. But I think that it is now time to move on to Valley. The Valley had so much going on that I had so many slides and notes. So let's first start with Jessie. Jessie Lally is just so wild. I think that Jessie has so many problematic tendencies and traits. And the episode started with Jessie like mansplaining what maturity is. So he like had this temper tantrum in his beige bloomers. And then the next day he was all like, the thing that Jessie does, which drives me wild, is he'll feign clarity after a tantrum and then just go on to do the same thing over and over and over again. So what that tells me is it's not clarity, it's manipulation. And he's trying to massage the narrative in ways that make him look like a person who understands, but I don't think he does understand at all. So he's like mansplaining maturity after he's like, I woke up, I understand what happened. And, real maturity tells us. And I'm like, bro, pack that shit up and take it. Go on now, you get with that. Because the spoiler alert is that Jessie goes on to display zero mature behaviors. Absolutely zero. Even on Watch What Happens Live, because I do try to watch that when I can. And, he just like went on Watch What Happens Live and just like walked back all of these things that he supposedly took accountability for. And so, whatever. I think it was so wild. So they're on the way to this trip and the bus breaks down, which I think was like an omen. It was like, you guys should not be going on this trip because when they went to the winery, it was just like such a disaster. But the thing that I was really struck by, it may have seemed really little, is that when the bus broke down, first of all, Luke was like, just knew what was wrong with it. And I'm like, oh, Luke, that was so sexy. I was like, he just knew what was wrong with this bus. He told the bus driver what to do. He was busy trying to fix the problem. While Jessie literally was unsafely in the roadway. People were honking at him because if you looked, his feet were like over the line. And when people are driving, that is absolutely unsafe. It's unsafe for him. It's unsafe for the drivers. And it's unsafe for the people on the bus. If a driver had to swerve or something and had hit, it was just so nonsensical. But Jessie's face he looked just maniacally so happy when he was doing it, sticking his thumb literally in the middle of the roadway so cars had to drive around him. And everyone on the bus was like, Jesse, you're an idiot. And he just was like so tickled by himself. And I'm like, bro, that is such king baby behavior. I cannot even. So when they get to the winery, Jesse and Michelle talk, which devolves into just insults, accusations. But what I found was really interesting is that Michelle is angry that Jesse's girlfriend, number one, is threatening to sue her. And number two, is taking an inappropriately intimate parent role in their daughter's life against her wishes. And I felt like for me, this gave a lot of really important context because we find out that their daughter has been calling Jesse's girlfriend my second mommy. And it's like, woof. I feel like not only is that major context, but I feel like what we see is Michelle is concerned about Isabella, their child's emotions, but Jesse's only concerned about his own. So Jesse claims he is triggered by Michelle and unable to manage emotions as a result, which, if I'm being honest, that is the king baby war cry. Like if king babies had a war cry or they had like a mission statement, if they had a website and they had a mission statement, it would be that. It would be, I'm triggered by you because I'm unable to manage big emotions. That's not a Michelle problem. And honestly, I feel like Michelle's worried more about her daughter's emotions and Jesse is more worried about his. And so again, I will just reiterate that a trigger is something that activates a memory or association of a past trauma or distressing event, which relationships, right, they do qualify under that. But I think that Jesse is using the word being triggered to mean that he's upset and to give an excuse for, abusive behaviors. Because make no mistake, calling the mother of your child over and over and over a prostitute and spreading rumors that she's a prostitute when you know that that's not true, that is abusive behavior. That is absolutely egregious. Because, Jesse, loves his daughter and he's a present parent, but like, how would you feel if your daughter was being treated like this by, anyone? I mean, regardless of sexual identity, orientation, anything like that, would you want your daughter's partner to be treating her like this? And if you don't, well, then maybe you should take stock of your behavior, Jesse, because I don't care what Jax or Jesse say. When you're doing things like this with the mother of your child, there's going to be some trickle down. The kids are very adept. They're very intuitive. And I just think that it's not a great situation for her. Jesse doubled, tripled down, calling Michelle a hooker. Brittany inserted herself because I think that she just has dealt with these behaviors so many times. Jesse and Jax do share similar behaviors. And then, Jesse finally admits the prostitution claim was a lie that he started and shared in the group chat. And it's like, you're a douche. That is just so despicable and disgusting. And make no mistake, Jesse is just trying to gain power and control over Michelle because he's angry that she had the audacity to walk away and be happy without him. And I think he's trying to punish her. And that is also, really gross. And so after the winery, Jesse feigns kindness. And this is another reason why I think Jesse is really charming and manipulative in ways that Jax isn't. Jax isn't charming at all. He's not, but Jesse is. He's very charming. And so Jesse feigns kindness to draw Michelle into another conflict. And why I'm saying I know it was feigning kindness is because he literally asked her, are you really happy? And she says yes, and he just could not handle it. His fragile ego, which, listen, fair enough, right? He has a wounded ego, fair enough. But it's he used it as a weapon, again, calling Michelle a lying, cheating whore. And then he tried asserting dominance and control, staking claim over my daughter. And it's bro, pack that shit up and move it along because this is so tired. I cannot watch, I don't know how many more episodes of The Valley there are, but I cannot watch Jesse. It's just getting so toxic. And so I think for me, I'll continue to cover it as long as I can make something out of it, which is talking about these behaviors and all of that stuff, because it's just getting really gross. Although Michelle contributes to the conflict for sure, like she has her own issues, abusive behaviors do not deserve empathy, understanding, or cooperation. And so Michelle has acted out, but Jesse is solely responsible for his egregious behaviors, like 1,000%. And I think that, we'll come back. But when he was on Watch What Happens Live, like any sort of insight that he's feigned, he walked back on Watch What Happens Live. And I was just like, whatever. The last thing I'm going to say about Jesse is he talks a lot about Michelle cheating, but what Jesse fails to identify is like, when you're in a relationship and your partner isn't meeting your needs, it's not an excuse. Like cheating is never appropriate, okay? But at the same time, how he treated her in the relationship, that makes a difference, right? In terms of people looking to get their needs met in other ways. Because people aren't going to stay in a marriage that they're not getting their needs met, and then, things happen and whatever. And so I just kind of take a non-judgmental approach to that. But what Jesse fails to recognize is his role in their marriage and their relationship. And, I just feel like it's convenient to call Michelle a lying, cheating whore and to not look at any of your behaviors that, you didn't meet her needs and you weren't a present partner and all of those things. But sure, let's blame it all on Michelle because you have a wounded ego. Speaking of egregious behaviors, Jack is now nicely texting Brittany updates, which, if I'm being honest, is literally part of the cycle of abuse. So it's like, and this is not new or special. Jax is doing the same thing that lots of other abusive or people who have abusive behaviors, I should say, do, which is they explode, they rage, and then there's a niceness. And that niceness isn't because he wants to be nice. It's because he's trying to draw her back into conflict and then to repeat the cycle all over again. And so Jax shared that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And so the thing of it is that bipolar disorder is a mood disorder that is, there's different types. There's bipolar 1, there's bipolar 2, there's cyclothymia. The mania is less severe. It's a very complex diagnosis. And so I would need to learn more about specifically what he was diagnosed with to speak on that. But generally, bipolar disorder is characterized by periods of high highs, mania or cyclothymia, and low lows, depression. And a lot of times with bipolar disorder, there are symptoms of irritability, especially with men, right? Because men have a harder time managing sadness the way that women can. And I think that's just societally, right? Like man up or be a man or whatever. And so those messages, kids hear that. And so the point is that, Jax's diagnosis, I'm grateful that he was able to get that. However, I believe that he's using it to draw Brittany back in. And guess what? It worked really swimmingly. And so the reason that it worked is because he's done it a million times before. And so Zach adeptly observed that Brittany appeared to feel the need to attend to Jax, which she did. And he knows that. And so that's why this is manipulative, right? Because she's saying, well, he's, being nice and I know he's sick and I want to attend to him. And it's like, Brittany, your time to attend to him is over. Let his treatment team attend to him. But so Zach said Brittany is trauma trained, which leads her to have difficulty taking space from Jax. And so the name is inaccurate, but the sentiment is spot on. And over time, an abusive relationship erodes our sense of self. It erodes our sense of healthy, appropriate boundaries. Jax, you can tell with all of his gaslighting and all of his bullshit, he has made Brittany feel like I'm sick and a marriage is in sickness and in health. And it's like, no. You threw a table at her and injured her and have displayed abusive behaviors. She does not owe you nothing. Nothing. Okay? The treatment team, they should attend to that, but that is not Brittany's responsibility right now. But he has Brittany's mind warped in terms of like, I'm trying to think of how to say this. It's kind of like grooming, where it's like, you get someone really used to this cycle of behaviors. And so to them, it seems normal and appropriate. But to people on the outside looking in, it's like, no, you don't need to attend to him. And so what I will say is that, Brittany admits that she put Jax before herself for so many years, and she needs to help to learn how to put herself first. And that is how she stayed with Jax for so long. When you learn to put somebody before you, that's codependency. And so codependency occurs when the other person becomes your emotional thermostat. If they're having a bad day, you're having a bad day. If they're having a great day, you're having a great day. And Brittany is struggling with codependency, which is why many treatment centers have a family education component. So the treatment facility that I worked at, they had a huge family component that was mandatory because addiction is a family disease and it doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so we would have families come in and give psychoeducation. And so all the therapists would take turns providing lectures and talks about codependency and how to draw healthy boundaries and all of that stuff. And then also a part of our program was a family therapy component where it would either be phone sessions or the families would come in and we would do therapy to talk exactly about this particular thing. So by the time an individual enters treatment, the family system is usually pretty sick too. And so Brittany just needs to reroute her emotional thermostat from Jax to herself, which is, to be honest, it's a really hard process. But when you do it, it's amazing because like my husband always jokes, I am great at this. So when he's in like a terrible mood, I can be in a great mood and I am not codependent at all. I've really, due to my history and my family and things like that, I've really, really worked on that. And I have the amazing ability to be like in an amazing mood when other people aren't in terrible moods. And it's kind of a win. So I encourage everyone to try it. So, but on the issue of Jax using his phone in treatment, okay, so this is what I looked up. And according to AI, I don't know how accurate this is. But AI says that while California doesn't have a specific law guaranteeing a patient's right to keep their cell phone in a facility, it does have laws protecting communication devices and ensuring access to communication. It's up to each individual facility to interpret and apply these laws. And so, as I said before, it's, if he's in a more self-pay concierge type place, they may have more lax rules. So it seems like I don't know exactly how that works, but I still stand by the fact that I think if there's a process where you're going to be able to have someone use their phone, I think there needs to be some checks and balances there, but I don't know legally what's allowed, right? Like, so if there's these laws, there may be laws where it's like, well, you can't take someone's phone or look at messages without their consent. Obviously, I would think that's a rule. And so obviously Jax is not going to be truthful, but my point is that I think all treatment centers just need checks and balances because the one thing I will promise you is that addicts, they are literal geniuses in terms of subverting and shucking and jiving and getting around rules and things like that, because that's what a sick brain does. A sick brain says, okay, where's the line and how can I skirt it? And it's not just addiction. I mean, it's just, when people are in unhealthy spaces, that's what they do. And so, and they're, in acute withdrawal, and then there's post-acute withdrawal syndrome that can last like over a year. A lot of people really, and this is why I love to talk about it, because a lot of people don't know how in-depth addiction is, and the withdrawal process is really significant. And so I think that, there's deviousness and there's sneakiness and there's just people are trying to break rules left, right, and center. They're trying to get their needs met without their substance. And so then there's acting out. And then if it's a co-ed facility, there's, a lot of sex that happens because, if you're withdrawing and you can't have your substance of choice, well, relationships and sex are a great, replacement. And so it's just a really complex process. And, I hope that he is able to be held accountable for the things that he's doing. And the one thing I will say is that before I move on to Danny is that I do not agree with Jax being at BravoCon. I think that it's disgusting that, I just think that Jax needs some consequences. And I think it's really ridiculous that he's not getting them and that Bravo just continues to feature this man. And, I'm not saying that the show should be gone, right? Because everyone needs to make their paycheck. Brittany needs to support crews and this is all of their jobs. And so I'm not saying everyone should lose their job because of Jax, but what I am saying is that I'm going to keep saying this over and over until someone listens, is that Bravo needs to reevaluate Jax's presence. He is, speaking of triggering, he is triggering people like nobody's business. Understandably, because his behaviors are egregious and they are abusive. And people who have been in abusive relationships, they see that and it's triggering. And so I just think that it's time that, in my opinion, it's time that Jax can go until he really learns and starts to understand his behaviors and starts to make some changes. But That's just me. So speaking of, oh my gosh. So Danny, at the winery, Danny came in ready to party, and he did this thing that I feel is so interesting working with people who have a history of problematic relationships with alcohol. Is he kept repeating this phrase that he was behind, right? So from start to finish of the day, Danny used the excuse that he was behind, he was behind, he was behind. And it's like, so he was behind everybody else and then drank himself into a literal stupor. And so it started with, he comes to the winery and he's like, I did my voice acting thing. I am free as a bird. He wanted to get, very inebriated. And it started with 10 straight minutes of him drinking. And Nia seemed really nervous and she reminded him, like, you've caught up. You've caught up. And I could immediately tell that Nia is used to this behavior. She's used to making excuses for him and she's used to having to check him. Because one thing I can tell you is people who have healthy relationships with alcohol, they don't need to be reminded that they should stop or take a break. They just do that themselves. And so Janet then observes Danny enter the pantry. So she's in the pantry. When they get back to the house, Danny comes in, chugs a bottle of tequila, and you can hear him drunkenly slurring. They, meaning the group, had a bigger head start. And it's like, oh, Danny. So cut to Danny passed out to the point that Nia wasn't able to wake him. Nia shook him and she was trying to talk to him, but he was legit unconscious. And if Danny wasn't like snoring loud, I would have been concerned. Like I would have wanted to call an ambulance, but he was snoring very loud. And so you could hear he was breathing. But one thing that I thought was so interesting that I could tell that I can't say with any amount of certainty what Danny has going on with alcohol. I can't label it. I can't say any of that. But what I can say is based on what I observed is that Nia is used to this behavior. So she pretends for the cameras that they were having a discussion. They weren't because he was legitimately unconscious. And then she proceeds to go to dinner lying, saying it's 50-50 if he'll come or not. And everyone knows that Danny is drunk, passed out in his bedroom. And Danny's not coming to dinner. Like everybody knows that. And so it's clear that Nia is protective over her family, but unfortunately, it's leading her to make excuses for Danny. And they both come off then as disingenuous because it's like, we know that you fight about this. Like, we know that you're mad about this. We know that you're mad that he's doing this on camera because Nia comes from the beauty pageant world. And in the beauty pageant, it's all like about how it looks, how things look, how things appear on the surface. And so I do think that there is a really subversive part to Danny and Nia that they don't want to show on camera. And it is reading disingenuous. And then Jasmine shared the story that during a blackout, Danny grabbed her thigh saying, bring daddy a drink. And then he also grabbed her fiance, Melissa's butt. And so I just want to remind people that Danny had no memory of the incident and then accidentally apologized to the wrong person because he didn't know who he did this to. He was only hearing it through people. And so he was corrected and then eventually made the apology to the correct people. That's a problem. Like if you're acting out when you're intoxicated and you're being sexually inappropriate with people and it makes them uncomfortable and then you're trying to apologize, but you don't know who it happened with, that's too much. That's a problem. So the group called out the absurdity of the situation, knowing that Danny was passed out drunk while Nia was completely whitewashing the situation. And then Brittany said she noticed them fighting all day and then cut to the production's receipts, which it's like, well, why didn't we see any of this? But whatever. And then she's pretending to be perfect on camera. And that is the definition of disingenuous. So Brittany has anger about the hypocrisy, which was valid, but her energy was so elevated. And it led, whenever someone's angry about a situation and the anger is appropriate, but then they have elevated energy, it's usually a sign to me that they're projecting about something. And so I believe that Brittany is projecting some of her anger about making excuses for Jax for too long onto Nia, who is doing the same thing with Danny. I think that sometimes when we stay in relationships that don't serve us, there's guilt, there's shame, there's like, oh my gosh, what was I doing? And so I think Brittany may be feeling bad about that. And so also what I think happened is like here Brittany is attending to Jax, who doesn't deserve it. He's lost his right to have Brittany attend to him at this point, but she's still doing it. And so I think she's projecting her guilt and shame about that on to Nia. That's just my theory. So Zach lets Nia know what the group has been saying about Danny being passed out drunk, which he was, and accusing them of not being genuine, which they aren't, and hiding things, which they are. So it's like, honestly, no lies are detected, but Nia is just trying to protect her very carefully curated facade. And so I want to talk a little bit about binge drinking. Binge drinking is defined as consuming a large amount of alcohol in a short period of time. So typically, this is like according to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. This is the definition: 5 or more drinks for men and 4 or more drinks for women in 2 hours. Danny exceeded this threshold in 10 minutes. And then continued to drink. Okay. So what I want to say about addiction is that not all addicts look and present like Jax. Not all addiction is really clear to the eye. There is a huge part of addiction that is a functioning person who goes to work, who makes money, who supports a family, who has a family, who has social gatherings, who does all these things. And they may not crash and burn it, but so binge drinking is as much of a problem when it comes to addiction as is someone like Jax, who uses every day. Or I'm sorry, I don't know if Jax uses every day, but I think that's what he and Brittany talked about. But my point is that Danny doesn't need to use every day to have a problem. And again, it's not my job. It's not appropriate for me to say that he has a problem. But what I can tell you is that on Watch What Happens Live, Andy asked Danny about his reaction to this episode. And it seems like Danny was really angry about Janet sharing his secret, chugging in the closet. And Danny challenged Janet's account, saying that he went into the pantry to grab a White Claw and ended up quickly taking a shot. And I'm like, bro, how is that better? To me, the thinking, so it's hard to put my finger on, but it's like when you work with people who like are on the spectrum of addiction, right? Again, there's this continuum. You learn to pick up on these little things. And it's like, that's such odd thinking to me, that explaining to the audience. So you went in there to grab alcohol, a different alcohol, and then you just decided to take a shot. And it's like, how is that better? That's like odd thinking to me. And so Danny is so mad at Janet, and he called her a toxic individual. And here's what I think about this. I think that Danny is mad that Janet outed him. I think he is acting out as a result. And I think that he is preying on the fact that people already don't like Janet. She's really not a fan favorite. And people really do like Danny and Nia, because I don't know that they're being super genuine. And so I think he's trying to divert attention away from himself. And so here's what I can say about this. You don't have to drink or use every day to be, have an issue with a substance. The real question is, how is blank impacting my life? And so Andy asked about inappropriate behaviors towards Jasmine and Melissa, and Danny admits that Nia wasn't happy and they had to meet with a therapist as a result. And so my observation is that Danny's alcohol use is creating issues in his marriage. It's creating issues with his friends. And that's significant, right? And so I think that when anything that we're doing is starting to impact us in areas of our life, it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's food, if it's alcohol, if it's a substance, if it's sex, if it's relationships, if it's gambling, it doesn't matter. We have to take down our defenses and be willing to look at what is really going on for me. But at this point, Danny is completely unable to do that, which tells me that his defenses are still actively engaged. So, that's going to be it on the Valley. I think that, wait, hold on. I'm sorry. One more thing is that on What Happens Live, before I wrap this up, is that Jesse said that he believes Michelle had an emotional relationship with Aaron, but not a physical one. And he admitted again to making up the hooker rumor, only to joke about it being an accident on Watch What Happens Live. And so to me, the ease with which Jesse lies is astounding. And he feigns accountability only to continually walk it back, which is how you know that there's really no accountability. And one thing Andy said on Watch What Happens Live is that Andy said that they are actively casting for the next season of Roni, disputing rumors that the franchise is canceled, which I thought was interesting. And then there are rumors that Lindsay Hubbard is going to be moving from Summer House over to Roni because now that she's a mom, Summer House isn't really the right fit for her. And so speaking of that, I'm just going to talk for a minute or two because I don't think there's a lot to say, but watching Jesse and Lexi completely go back and forth was wild. And so the only thing I want to say is we see Lexi break up with Jesse and, there's so much drama and there's so much back and forth. But I think that, while Jesse is problematic, Lexi is completely ignoring her role in all this. When she said something to Jesse about die a little bit inside trying to teach you. And it's girl, come on. That's insane. That's so drama. I think, Lexi is blaming Jesse for her lack of relationship with the girls. And so Jesse certainly contributed, but Lexi needs to start taking some accountability. For her and Jesse, we're super into this relationship. Jesse, I believe, love bombed her. She's responsible for her own shit, but they were fast and furious. And now I think Lexi regrets it because the whole summer is gone. She made no relationships with any of the girls, really, until she started having problems with Jesse. And then the thing that I don't like about Lexi is that she is more than happy now to throw Jesse under the bus to try to gain relationships with people. And I just don't think that's appropriate. And I just think it speaks to her character as well. On Watch What Happens Live, they've both been really happy to just she's been happy to say things that Jesse said about West and all these other things. And so I think that Lexi is trying to damage Jesse's relationship. So Jesse and Sierra made up, and I think Lexi was upset about that. And so I think she was trying to triangulate Sierra into some of this argument at Lindsay's Freedom dinner, which was so ridiculous. That dinner was a waste of sandwiches and just so insane. But I think Lexi was trying to triangulate Sierra and Jesse into this argument. And then I think that Lexi said something about Jesse said that he disliked Sierra, but it's well, he obviously didn't say that. He said he disliked the way Sierra went about something. And I just think that Lexi is trying to dive bomb his relationships because she wants to blame him when it's girl, the call's coming from inside the house too. You need to be accountable for your stuff. And so the last thing I'll say about Summer House is that Lindsay hosted her rival Sandwich Freedom dinner, and she made a speech, and she wrote this Instagram novel. Oh my God, Amanda was Lindsay loves a timeline. I thought that was so funny. And then just thanked Carl for setting her free. And so here's what I think is going on with Lindsay. I think she's experiencing grief about how becoming a mom will change her life, right? I think that can be scary and overwhelming. And also, I think how it's going to change her career, right? Lindsay's been on Summer House forever, and she knows being a mom, she's not going to be back at Summer House. And so it's I understand. I think she's having a crisis of identity, a crisis of career. But either way, I just think she's projecting her emotions onto Carl, and she uses him as a whipping post, which I don't like that, because if this was a man doing this to a woman, I think people would be really outraged. There's a lot of parts I like about Lindsay, but this is one part that I just think is unacceptable. And I think her behaviors towards Carl have been really hard to watch. But while Carl is frustrated, he didn't take any of the bait. And I've been really impressed with Carl's emotional maturity because it's such a refreshing change from all of these king babies on Bravo. Give me a Jason, give me a Carl. We need more Jessies and Carls, not Jesse. Woo! Opposite. I meant Jason. More Jasons and Carls and less Jessies and Jaxes. So that is going to be it for me today. I just want to remind everybody to please check me out please follow my podcast. That really helps when you leave a 5-star review. That really helps. Check me out on all my social medias. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. I am on Patreon at Your Bish Therapist. If you love listening to the podcast and you don't like listening to ads, Patreon for $5 a month, you get access to complete ad-free. Over on YouTube, you can get ad-free. And when I do Zooms and everything, if you're a subscriber on Instagram or on Patreon or YouTube, you also get access to do the Zooms. And we just did one and it was super fun. So please, check all that out. I appreciate you all. I hope that this is a beautiful week for everybody. And if it's not, just remember whatever comes is coming and you'll meet it when it does. And you have the resources to do it. So for today, that's going to be it for me. Sending love to you and yours, and ta-ta for now. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Great Heart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.